The defamation suit the Treasurer Joe Hockey has brought against Fairfax newspapers entered its second day today, with Mr. Hockey again answering questions for several hours. The suit centres on a Fairfax story about his relations with a body called the North Sydney Forum and whether donors got special access to the Treasurer through it. Mark DiStefano has been covering the story for the BuzzFeed website. He told me about Mr. Hockey's testimony today.
So, just as a lack of vision dictated the approach taken by TV journalists, the lack of audio available has had an impact on how broadcasters reported on Hockey versus Fairfax. It was perhaps even more difficult for the radio journos, I think, because at least the TV networks were able to capture the key players in and around the scene of the courthouse. But because none of those key players were speaking to the media, the radio journos didn't even have the voices of the newsmakers themselves. And that is something they prize. So, as a result, the segment from ABC Radio's PM program, heard here, is, after that introduction, entirely made up of a pre-recorded interview between newsreader Mark Colvin and reporter Mark DiStefano. With one of their only other options being a package made up entirely of DiStefano's voice, this interview format gives them the best chance of covering the story in detail, but without losing the interest of their listeners. And the program adopted the same approach for its coverage over the first 3 days of testimony. So, it was obviously something that they thought was best suited to the story being covered. While PM airs quite late in the day, this interview approach is a nice option for TV and radio because it can be done live from the scene and it can provide up-to-date information on the latest developments. It's a good way of taking advantage of a story's currency because if you wait for a more complete package, then it's likely the story might have changed anyway, or even worse, it's going to be bumped for something new. So let's take a moment to listen to a couple of minutes of the exchange between Colvin and DiStefano.
What dominated today's testimony was taking Mr. Hockey back to yesterday's testimony about the website, the North Sydney Forum's website, which really does splash his face around. If you go onto its website, this is the forum that's supposed to be a local chamber of commerce. Mr. Hockey is there with a big thumbs up, and basically there is a whole bunch of material that is suggesting that if you do sign up to the North Sydney Forum, you'll get quite a few meetings, and it was actually set up as a purpose to support him in his re-election. And Mr. Collins, the barrister for Fairfax, went through quite a few, I guess, mega rich donors of the North Sydney Forum. There was UBS, the bank, and Deutsche Bank, and Metcash. All of these businesses which don't have any ties to North Sydney or the local area. And he asked Mr. Hockey, did you know that these groups were members? And Mr. Hockey was left, I guess, baffled and said, no, I didn't at the time. And so the Fairfax barrister was essentially trying to show that this North Sydney Forum, which was set up a long time ago to work as a local chamber of commerce, by the time all of these allegations surfaced, wasn't operating like that anymore.
But who says that it was set up as a local chamber of commerce?
Mr. Hockey himself.
I understand that in court there was evidence produced that there was already a local chamber of commerce.
Back more than a decade ago, when the North Sydney Forum was established, Mr. Hockey said that one of the reasons it was to be established, and he did help set it up, was because at the time there was not a local chamber of commerce. Over the course of many years, there then became a North Sydney Chamber of Commerce. It's just been an embarrassing, system of Mr. Hockey having to admit that this North Sydney Forum really didn't serve the interests of the North Sydney electorate, which he is the member of. And today that really came to light, I guess.
So we'll pause there, and the whole interview and the whole story is available at the link above. But because of the form, DiStefano's style here is very casual. And some of his language choices, like big thumbs up, splash his face around, I guess, they are colloquial. And I guess I have a slight qualm with that here because for a case that is so much about Fairfax's semantic choices, I think he probably could have taken more care when relaying the words of other people, making a conscious effort to quote directly more often. How you do that on radio presents another challenge, I guess, because do you adopt a different tone for a different speaker? Do you say, and I quote? I'm not sure. Because of the casual style, sentence length does become quite long-winded here, and it's not always easy to follow the interviewee's train of thought. A more manicured package would have been written with pauses and breaths in mind, and probably resulted in a clearer message ultimately. But it's not all bad news with this format, because Colvin takes advantage of the fact it's an interview, takes advantage of the to and fro, to clarify particular pieces of information, and even interjects once or twice. And his questions then determine the direction and the structure of the report. Interestingly, DiStefano is not an ABC journalist. Colvin introduces him as someone following the case for the website BuzzFeed. So he's a really good example of someone who has to manipulate his work according to the platform in which he's working. So if you go and have a look at what he's written for that clickbait monster that is BuzzFeed, some of his recent pieces include Chris Hemsworth has just joined Twitter and nothing will ever be the same. Or my personal favourite, the Pope picked up a pizza in his Pope-mobile and it was probably the most Italian thing ever.